Hello guys, David Vose here. Wow, it turned out really beautiful today. It's like a summer day again. Yesterday was cold and we had snow, but the snow's about gone. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Friends, I want to show you something here today that put put some pieces together that we've been talking about, but um you know, I have some information that I believe is correct. I'm going to show you why I believe that. But I'm going to show you that the world has no idea. And I don't know if that's why AI doesn't know, because I put this together from what information is available. If I can do it and I'm a human, it seems to me that we humans must be a lot smarter than machines or computers, that AI is not really that smart. Now, I don't necessarily think that's the only reason why I'm not getting answers by going to AI. I think they're trying to hide something, but I don't know that they're smart enough to hide anything because I don't even think they know. So I'm a little confused on that. But I don't really believe that AI is aware or very smart. I've said over and over again, it's just files, and in your computer, they have cabinet files and they have program files, and it's all categorized, and it has a way to put everything in a category and then bring up certain catchwords and so forth and put it together. But they don't come to any conclusion. Evidently, AI, they can't come to conclusions. So I don't know how they're going to take over the world with AI, because it can't seem to come to any conclusions or understand anything. So we'll talk about that here in a minute too. But I do want to show you a number of maps, ancient maps today. And we're going to learn a lot by looking at these maps. So basically, we're going to be looking at some maps in this video today and talking about what we see there. It's going to be eye-opening. But another thing we'll learn today is that AI really isn't conscious or aware or capable of controlling anything. Now, some say it's just piecing together little articles it finds. Maybe it words it pretty much the same way or changes the spelling. I don't know how it does it. I believe the only way that this AI thing works is it just some kind of uh, a compartmentalized file system. So it takes all the information in the known knowledge bank, puts it all in files. But see, that's going to be limited. They're not going to be able to see things the way a human does. I can see, for instance, I'm going to show you about Maratha on the map. And I believe it means Martha. Now, the computer wouldn't know that because there might be somewhere some reference to some language that translates Maratha to Marta or something. And then they would be able to, but I don't know how, since there's so many different pronunciations, that I don't think the computer could see it right away. It doesn't take me but a second to notice the resemblance. And then I look at the map and I see other things that give me clues. They call the whole western coast of the United States by California New Granada, which is someplace in Spain, which is where they left on their boat. And they leave out any markings on the map. Like, they obviously, whoever these people are, don't know what's there. They're not mapping Native American places, really. For the most part, they're mapping what villages they've already seen on the coast. Maybe they're writing down what the natives told them the name of that town was, but this big word, Marta, is where they have all these lines. And I think it's cartographer lines from sailors using the compass and so forth, and getting coordinates and having a central coordinate and then a straight line from there to here, to there, to here, to here, to find things. And one of the big, on a lot of these maps, one of the central places where these lines all go from, like making a point in the middle. They all start from this point and go outward like a flower, is this Marata. In the western part of the United States on the coast by California. And I noticed they're all over the place. Chilago might be another place. I'll have to look at the map again, but there are certain locations where they seem to be central, and then they draw their coordinates from there, and they branch out like flowers, and then they interconnect these lines. And so this tells me, I don't know, I guess the computer can't figure this out, but this tells me that these lines were drawn from this location because this is a particular location important to the sailor, to the one who's doing the exploring. And they had a reason when they came over here. I don't believe there wasn't many sailors for centuries that have been here and have come and have gone and so forth. And there were civilizations in America. We don't have all their maps. But at a time when man didn't know what was going on, when we were kind of lost in the dark ages, shall we say, when they were persecuting and killing and murdering, and we had one group of people, the Vikings, that were destroying and murdering and taking over all the peoples of the world. Again, the computer wouldn't know, or AI, why that was. I know through my research that they had accepted the idea of law and order. And they had the law of Moses. And in the law of Moses is genocide and chosen races and these kinds of things. Colonizing other people, murdering them and replacing them, and conquering the world and building it, Jerusalem. And so the Vikings had the idea that they were going to follow the law of Moses and genocide the world and submit the world to its rule. And they were the chosen people. The other group, and this is something, again, that AI doesn't seem to know who the other group is. The other group was the French. The first group was the Vikings, or the Nordic tribes. The second group are the ones they were persecuting, which is Jesus and Mary Magdalene's children from the Languedoc in southern France and up the Rhone Valley. I have proof for this because everything that we find about this history from Christ down to our day is all connected to this. And these two groups fighting all the way down to what we talked about the other day with the Huguenots. And we're going to find out that the Huguenots, many of them, aside from coming to America, because that was then in those days, they knew, oh, guess what? There's a new country. It's, we're going to be free. It's far, far away from these vulgar barbarians that's trying to kill us. Of course, they got on the boat and followed them. And this is why when the people that got on the boat to follow them were looking specifically for where they went, not necessarily for Native Americans and ruins and cultural understanding. They were coming to try and find where Jesus and Mary Magdalene's descendants, the Knights of St. John, Prester John, where they went, because they knew they had a lot of treasure. And the idea of the seven cities is not just some coincidence that there was a seven cities septimania in Europe or in France. And these maps, right about the time that they were fleeing in Inquisitions over here in America, the whole map is just, there's the United States, there's North America. But the only thing on the map we're going to show you is the Sacramento River. Most of them have that. The Colorado River, which they call Totontiac, and the Gia River, which runs and empties out right where I live, with the Gia cliff dwellings. And there's where they map these seven cities of gold. And we've also heard them referred to as seven caves. Now, if people are going to make a map in those days, and they're from Granada, they're going to say, oh, we found a New Granada, right? They're going to name it after themselves. So that's why they call it New Granada on all these maps. And one of the places that they Well, all the cities in town all have something to do with Mary and Martha and things like this. And John, right? Prester John. And we're going to find out who Prester John is in a way that we haven't really discussed at some point here. I don't know if we'll do it in this video, but it's very important that we understand why John is called the Prester, the priest, or the elder, not just any priest, right? And why? Did you know that if John was, I'll just say this, kind of as a hint. John the Revelator, should we call him, is strange that nobody seems to know who he is. Well, he's not the Apostle John, right? He's a different John. He's John the Presbyter. Well, wait a minute. On the cross, Jesus told a John, there is your mother, and mother, there is your son. And as I've said, there's no question in my mind that that was the first night that John was knighted by Jesus himself. And this is borne out in the Templar rites, and they tell you why they're making these things. They're doing this because they're protecting the holy blood of Mary Magdalene from Jesus Christ. But if this particular John, then, in 1st and 2nd and 3rd John, the epistles, says, I've got Mary, the lady, and she sends you greetings to all her children, then we know that whoever wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John is the same John that wrote the book of John. Now, what's interesting about the book of John is that unlike all the other Gospels, it spends a long time with the first chapter or two talking about the nativity scene, not of Jesus, but of a man named John. Interesting. And you say, well, if that man named John was the John that was later on told, there's your mother, and is proven to be the same John that did the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and in that Gospel of John, he appears to not ever say his own name, like, and I did this and I did that. He's writing the book. John wrote the book of John, but he doesn't say I did this and I did that. But he always says in the book of John, the disciple whom he loved. And of course, elsewhere, we're told that the title of this person, the disciple whom he loved, was Lazarus, which is Lazarus. And he loved Mary and Martha too. But their brother Lazarus he loved. Or whether it's a brother or a relative. But Lazarus was the disciple whom Jesus loved. And John was the disciple whom Jesus loved. Well, Lazarus was raised from the dead by Jesus. And at the last chapter of the book of John, we get this declaration where Jesus says to this John, well, speaking to Peter, what is it to you, Peter, if John, or the disciple whom Jesus loved, remains until I come? So this means now we can link that John up that wrote the gospel with the book of Revelation and the John who wrote that, because in the book of Revelation, it tells you that the angel says to John, the Revelator, you will preach again before nations and kings and tribes and peoples and tongues. So you might say, well, that could be another John, and both of these Johns are going to come in the latter days and be here in the latter days. Or you could use your common sense and say, well, it's this one John that's in both places saying or said to be here in the latter days. So now we've got 3 different Johns that are said to be individuals that will be here in the latter days or will return. We have John the Baptist, where Jesus said, if you will receive it, this is he Elijah, who is going to come. So they expected Elijah to return. Jesus said it was John the Baptist. And then he said, who will also return. We see from other verses in the Bible that before the millennial reign, Elijah shall return to preach in the wilderness. Get out of her, my people. Repent of your sins. Elijah is to come in the latter days when the woman goes into the wilderness for the 1,260 days. He's going to be preaching in the wilderness. And John is said in the book of Revelation, you will again come to the world and preach to nations and tribes and peoples and tongues. And John was there with Jesus because it says the disciple whom he loved in the book of John. So the book of John was written by some man named John who was a disciple. Now Lazarus is also called a disciple, and others are called disciples. You don't have to be one of the 12 apostles to be a disciple. And Jesus tells Peter, what is it to you if he remains until I come, or is present when I come? Perhaps he means. But John was traditionally the youngest of the disciples. But they come to a funny conclusion by that, because we know then that if John lived to be 100, after 100 he was still alive, then he couldn't have been born much earlier than the date that Jesus was born. And would probably, because you can't imagine him being much more over 100 years old. I think tradition says he died around 102 or something. But if he did, then he probably was born right about the same time as Jesus. And of course, John the Baptist was born 6 months before Jesus was, according to the scripture. So that fits that that's the same John the Baptist. Because if John the Baptist was born 6 months before Jesus was born, then in the year 100, John the Baptist would have been about a 101 or 104 or something like that. Jesus may have been born 456 BC, but it fits the age of John the Baptist. So all three of these Johns, John the Revelator, John who wrote the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John in the book of John, and John the Baptist are all going to return, and they're all Johns. Interesting. No other person in the Bible has ever said by name that they're going to come again, except Elijah, which we know was one coming of Elijah was John the Baptist. And that's the only person named. Yes, I've said that probably everyone will return. We're all going to be here. We'll all have to appear before the judgment seat of Christ, right? Everybody's here. That's why there's 8 billion people in the world. But specifically, John is singled out because he's going to do something. He's going to come for a reason, to preach repentance and to prepare the way for the Lord. Because the Lord came once and he's going to come again, and so there's got to be 2 comings of Elijah as well. Or John the Baptist, or John the Revelator, or shall we say, the man who was the first knight that, to this day, the Freemasons, probably not knowing what they're doing, seem to be very much reverencing John's head that was beheaded, The skull and bones that you see, the cross and all this stuff is about John, whose head had been severed, and who was the head of the Essenes, who some, like Simon Magus, who hadn't accepted Jesus right away, and Thaddeus, who was the disciple of John, never accepted Jesus and continued to revere John and not Jesus. There were a lot of Gnostics that continued to revere John the Baptist. The Knights of St. John certainly did have him in honor, as they did Mary. They certainly revered Mary. And they spoke very highly of John. I don't know if they revered him. I don't know if we could show a specific place where they say that, because a lot of this is tradition and we don't know for certain, but we do know that they revered John, a particular John, and Mary Magdalene, and a Martha. What happened to Lazarus? Well, that's the disciple whom he loved. And you want to know something else? What is told to John in the book of Revelation? Eat up the little scroll, it'll be sweet upon thy tongue and bitter in thy belly, and you will again preach before nations and tribes and peoples and tongues. Word for word, that is something that was told to Ezekiel, the prophet. Now, the Bible works this way. It's letting you know that this was John in a pre-existence. Ezekiel, the prophet, was John in his pre-existence. And from the Quran and other traditional beliefs from certain branches of Christianity in parts of the world, even in the Sephardic communities, they taught that Ezekiel was also Buddha. In Ezekiel, he's called the son of Vose, which Z's and D's are interchangeable. But we don't know for certain about that. I don't know that for certain. But there is a long tradition that Ezekiel was Buddha. If Ezekiel was Buddha, then I believe that Buddha could have been also then John, of course, because I believe Ezekiel was most logically John, since they both were told that they were going to preach again. Just like John came once and now he's coming again. In one place, what is it to thee if he remains until I come, or tarries? In the other case, you will return and come back again, because he's like an old man over 100 years old when he's saying this. So he's not talking about in that life. But you're going to come again and preach before nations and tribes and tongues, which probably explains what it means, tarry until I come. So now going back to the Gospel of John, and now we've already proven then that the Gospel of John, the epistles of John, and the Revelation of John is all written by the same person. Now let's go back to the Gospel of John. We find that the first couple of chapters is this nativity scene of John, who baptized Jesus. And Jesus declares, the greatest man that ever lived, born from a woman, is John. Well, how could that John be John the Revelator? Remember, John was beheaded. He died because John the Baptist was the head of the Essenes and the Ebionites and the whole worldwide mystery school, having the mantle of Elijah. And John the Apostle was just the brother of, there was John and Andrew and Peter, and they were all relatives, and they were just walking along the seashore, and Jesus says, come and follow me. I think the Bible would say that this person, well, in fact, in the book of John, you can see there's a difference between the disciple John, who became the apostle John, and John the Baptist. They're two different people. And so this is why nobody seems to know who this other John is, even though he's so important because he writes all these scriptures in the Bible. And he's this great revelator, and is the one who's going to remain till he comes. And his gospel seems to have a very big interest in a guy named John the Baptist. But it tells you there that John the Baptist is beheaded. But then right after John's beheaded, Jesus begins to preach. And the scribes and Pharisees and all the people say, has John the Baptist been raised from the dead? Now, you could say, well, that's just a question, Dave. It's just a question. That doesn't mean he was raised from the dead. But the Bible works in a mysterious way. It will tell you something inadvertently a lot of times. It's probably not likely that anything that's said in the New Testament, if it's written by inspiration, was just idle speech. They were saying it, but it's not true, right? I mean, things that people were saying, it meant that the rumor was going around, that it was being told to the people that John the Baptist had been raised from the dead. That's what it's really saying. But remember, John the Baptist was born 6 months before Jesus. So if we go to the year 100 AD, John was supposed to be about 100 years old, according to traditions, Polycarp and Ignatius and so forth. This means that this puts this John the Revelator to be born right at the very same time that Jesus was born, right around the same time, because in the year 100, he was 100 years old. And our calendar starts at 0 because Jesus was born then. So Jesus was born then, and so was John the Baptist. So we've got this guy named John the Baptist who actually is the same age as John the Revelator. And we've proven that John the Revelator is John the epistle writer, John the presbyter, and John who wrote the Gospel of John, who would tarry until he comes. So I won't go any more of that, but the point is that it takes a human to figure that information out. But we have so many tie-ins that if we get enough of these tie-ins, we can intuitively understand something, because we know that the Bible's trying to give us clues. So we're going to take the same way of understanding and learning that we just used and use it with these maps. You say, well, who made the maps? Well, they were people coming. One of them, like you've heard of the Piri Reis map, Piri Reis or whatever they call it. I always say Piri Resi because I've said that with so long, but I know that's not the right pronunciation. It's Piri Reis, I guess, map. Piri was a man's name. Reis means captain, I guess, in the Ottoman language, from the Ottoman Empire of Istanbul and that area, in Constantinople. In the tongue of those people that they spoke, Reis meant captain, and his name was Piri. So we know then the guy who wrote this map, the Piri Reis map, he was from the Ottoman Empire. We also know that the Spanish, well, notice that the Spanish have domes and Islamic buildings. So does the Ottoman Empire. Why? Because it was Islamic. The Islamic Empire ruled Spain up until 1492, when Ferdinand and Isabella, Ferdinand II, took it over. Ferdinand II of Aragon. And they took it over for the Roman Catholic Church. They conquered them and drove them out. The whole Iberian Peninsula was populated by Sephardic Jewish people and Jewish people that were also Christians from Mary Magdalene. The Cathars, the Huguenots down the years later, and they call them different things. But they were Protestants that had their roots back to the traditions of Mary. And they lived in France and Spain. Now, I don't know what the architecture was there necessarily in Septimania or originally the Languedoc, but as they moved into Spain, they mixed with Islamic peoples, and their architecture turned out to be kind of mosques and so forth. And so when you look at California and you see all these mosques and this, Spanish stuff. So the Spanish people and the Portuguese, well, the Portuguese took over Brazil, but the Spanish took over that area. And they came from Spain, and they brought with them this architecture. And of course, they were the people that were being driven out in the Spanish Inquisition because they were Jewish and because they were of Cathar origin and belief. They believed in Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And they had been driven out of France before that, and that's why they had the Waldensian Inquisition. And then later on, the Huguenot Inquisition, which was more of a massacre, and then they fled to America. But my point with all of that is that there's some kind of familiarity between California and Mexico and Spain with the architecture and the people and the beliefs originally, as well as the Ottoman Empire, because when they drove them out of Spain, they didn't all come to America. Some of them went to the Ottoman Empire. In fact, they're saying about 300,000 of them went there, which is a lot of people to be uh, having this big influx into Constantinople, into the Ottoman Empire. And it was about that time or thereafter then that the Ottoman Empire, and they welcomed them. The Ottoman Empire, the Islamic peoples, they're welcomed. We find the Ottoman Turks and up in that area, even up in not far from there, Bulgaria and places like this, Moldova, and they were very Cathar Protestant people, because these same people from the Cathars ended up in that area too, and still had these traditions about Mary Magdalene. So they welcomed them because they were brothers. And this area up in Turkey, which is what we call the Tartarian country, that's Tartar, where John, in his old age, is probably protecting Mary or a line of knights or something, and he's there in Ephesus in Turkey, literally where the capital of this Tartarian kingdom was. And that's the Ottoman Empire later on, and these same people go there. Why do they go there? Because that's their brethren. And we're going to find out that later on, it was the place where the Piri Reis map was made, probably because they were trying to figure out how to get over there, where many of their people had gone to hide the 7 treasures of gold that belonged to Mary Magdalene, that John the presbyter took some sailors or some knights or whatever and went to a place and buried it where no one would find it until the latter days. So they weren't just a bunch of homeless peasants either. Some of them had money. They welcomed them because they had trade abilities, and they were intelligent people, elites that were being run out, right? Because Mary Magdalene or the Knights of St. John, they were the elite. They were being run out when the Holy Roman Empire took it over. So they welcomed them in the Ottoman Empire. And it was from there that they made the Piri Reis map, or Piri Reis map. Why did they make the Piri Reis map? Well, look at the Piri Reis map and look at all the maps subsequently after that. We don't know. We don't have the map that Columbus used, but he probably used some of. There was this big, large map that I think was used by Marco Polo, and there were other maps, but they weren't complete, and they didn't know much about North America. Why? Because they weren't interested in North America that much. Even if they knew it was there, they were looking for gold or money or whatever, trade routes to India or spices or something. But it's not. They weren't really the big concern to find what's on the coast of California, unless there's somebody had already gone there and you had a desire to go there. And if you look at these maps, starting around 1560 something, you see North America, just like we see it today, pretty much, with the Gulf of California. You see the Sacramento River. They didn't call it that. You see the Colorado River, and you see the Gila River prominently. On a lot of maps, that's the only 3 rivers you see, except for a few other, like 4 rivers down in Mexico going into the ocean, but from the mountains of Mexico going down westward into the ocean. But where you get to the top of the Gulf of California, you see one river, which is the Gila, and one going north, which is the Colorado. And then if you go up a bit further on these maps, you see this other big river. And you're like, what's that? Well, it's the Sacramento. Those were on the map because those were places that were, if you were going to go there, you're not the natives that have been there all your life, but you're a sailor and you arrive, and the first place you're going to arrive to is coves where you can get off the ocean and go into a bay or something. And you notice there's a mouth of a river, and this is going to be an area where people are going to come first. They're not going to just park anywhere, their boat, right, on the cliff. They got to go into a bay or something. So these are the most likely places that you would land, and this is where you would make these names. Martha, or Martha. And why would you say Martha? Why would you name everything John and Mary and Martha? And Granada from Mexico, from leaving from Spain, because you left from Spain, or you used the Piri Reis map because you were an Ottoman Empire trying to figure out where these people, your ancestors, went, and that's why they made these maps. They were interested in not just finding a trade route to India, They were interested in finding what they had on these maps. And if you look at the maps, and I'll show you here before we read this, here's a vivid maps, historical maps of the United States and North America. And these are ancient maps, 1529, which is very accurate. Look at that. Here is one that doesn't look very accurate in 1570. And then here is the 17th century map, which is literally almost the 15th or the 16th century. It's 1610, just barely into the 17th century. The map of the Americas by Frederick DeWitt, 1610. Now I want to show you in this early stages, they were making these maps. And remember, all of these guys are coming over here for a reason. And look at what they do. Okay, here's a picture of it that I can focus in more clear so you can see this. Okay. So this is what map they're using, that they've made to go someplace. And the most important words are Spain, Hispania, Nova, New Spain. And we've got Marata. And I guess Cibola. And this Totontiac, which we now know, we can determine, people have verified that's the Colorado, which it obviously is. But then if you go up the California coast, you find another river. It doesn't say Sacramento, but that's obviously the Sacramento River, the only one that would be big enough to put on the map. If you're going to put one, you're going to have to put the Sacramento, you're going to have to put the Colorado, you know, you're going to have this other river up here by Vancouver, right? Of course, those are the big bays, inlets. But why is there such a big river called the Gia? Which they didn't call it that then, but in 50 years from now, there'll be other maps that does call it Gia. But in this particular one, it doesn't show the 7 cities of gold at the end of this river, but in a lot of the other ones, it does. Why do they put that one on the map? Because the Gia River is really not that big. There might be other rivers you would want to put on there that might be bigger. But they've got these 3 rivers, the Sacramento, the Colorado, and the Gia. And all of the names. Well, let me show you another one that shows you what's at the end of the Gia River. By the way, I noticed this kind of an ancient map, a pretty old map. New Mexico is called, the whole state of Mexico was New Mexico then. And there's Louisiana and Virginia and the 13 colonies and so forth. But look at this big lake. So they wrote this map in like the 17th, 18th, 16th something. And they've got this big lake. And we know that there was a Lake Bonneville that, you know, covered 1,000 square miles or whatever, you know, from Utah all the way, you know, everywhere through Idaho and Nevada. But scientists says that it wasn't that big a couple of hundred years ago. But the people who landed there said it was. They went through the Gulf of, or into the bay there in San Francisco, and boom, there's this big lake. That's interesting. It's strange that we will trust our scientists who say, oh, no, that couldn't be. Geologists say, no, that wasn't the case. Some maps, there's no Great Lakes. You know, they could have overlooked things because they didn't, you know, they were just guessing. But it's pretty strange if you're just guessing. You're going to be, oh, let's put this big old lake over here. Right? Unless you had seen it. Well, that's just beside the point. And of course, a lot of the maps of that time, this is 1730, as late as 1730, have California as an island. Now, if it was just one guy, some crazy man, but it seems like a lot of the maps had California as an island. So, I don't know if within 100 years or 200 years, the geography had changed. You'd tend to think that the people who made these maps were giving you accurate information. If there was a huge lake somewhere or something that we call California today was an island then, you'd think they would have known that. it was so well believed that they kept thinking there was a Northwest Passage, and this went on down for years and years because at some point there was. Somebody claimed there was, and then all of a sudden they came back 100 years later and it wasn't there. Maybe geology changes. There's another one, see, with California's an island. But you see that the Great Lakes, they knew exactly the size of the Great Lakes and, very close. Cuba, they knew well, there in the Yucatan, there's a crazy looking thing that we don't have today, but the basic shape, they had islands there in that big California passage. They knew about all these islands and different things. I mean, it doesn't seem logical to me that they would have gotten that wrong. I'm trying to find an older map. So look, here is another picture that I can show you kind of in color and stuff. Now, how would they have gotten that lake wrong? And notice there's another big lake up here. It's not quite the same. I mean, the Great Lakes are there. They're pretty correct. They've got Caroline, Florida. I mean, at this point, they must have known what California looked like, right? Maryland, New York. Pretty accurate. And there's the Gulf of California. But they've got there's the bay going into California. The Sacramento River is now the outlet for a Meru Bay de l'Ouest. And there's all kinds of islands in there too. But on this map, they get so many things so detailed. There's Louisiana and Canada. So where that lake is then, it is in the United States because I believe this is Vancouver. So it's down into where you would go to Utah, but it actually extends way up into Canada. And then there's probably a lake there too or something. But why would they make these lakes if they didn't exist? And then you go down here and you see St. Joseph. That's not an Indian name. But then there is a Geronimo and Santa Fe. That might have been the Pecos River that we have today. But where the Gia River would be, Presentacion or something, I don't know what that is. Franciscus or something. Savaneur, Antonia, El Flarion. And there's this thing called Petite Seville. Well, Seville means a plain or a valley. But there was also a place called Seville in Spain, where it says, AI says the name Sevilla comes from the Phoenician word Cephella, which means plain or valley. It can also refer to someone from the city of Seville, Spain. Seville is the capital of Andalusia, an autonomous community in the southern Spain. It's known for architecture, heritage, sites, and views. It's obvious that a lot of these names have to do with they're coming from Spain. Santiago, and that kind of thing. This is New Navarre. Well, notice something about this word, Navarre, meaning. The word Navarre has multiple meanings. Historical kingdom, a region, and a surname. So it means a kingdom. It could mean plains, from the Spanish word Navarro, which comes from the Basque word Nava or Nava. Again, Basque, that's southern France. And remember, the royal line in southern France has always been Valley, Waldensia, Walloz, Val or whatever. And now we've got Navarro, which is a Basque word meaning valley. The Basque-speaking person, an ethnic surname that originated in the kingdom of Pamplona in the High Middle Ages. But it says it's a former kingdom in southwestern France, a region in southern France and northern Spain, an autonomous community and province in northern Spain, and a part of the northern Basque country, France, also known as Basse-Navarre, Lower Navarra. The Basque established the kingdom of Navarre in the 9th century. The parts of Navarre south of the Pyrenees joined Spain in 1515. That's why it's northern Spain, because it's really kind of, you might say, eastern Spain, right? Where it borders France. So it's the lower southern region, Septimania, the Languedoc. It's a Basque word, which means southern France. So, whoever landed here were from France. And we've got angels, we've got, I don't know, I can't read, Ferte and Biotico and Spitigbi. There's nothing to do with native peoples. And if you look out here on the coast, you've got Madeline, like Lady Magdalene. You've got St. Thomas. You've got Balinus, Kedros, Clement, Lucia. I think these are individuals that were famous in this. Here is Point Southern Francois. So we're told this was all Spanish. Well, at some point it became Spanish, became Mexico, but the area around, curiously, around this Guia River is, which they call New Mexico here, right here, New Mexico, is also New Navarre, or New France, or Southern France. And this is right where the Guia River goes up. And we've got all these words that might have some reference. There's St. Joseph, you know. So we could spend hours looking at all these names. But the point I'm trying to make here is that though we've got Louisiana and Canada and Carolina and Florida, this region way back then wasn't all Mexico. There was a spot in this particular region that was colonized by French people. And they believed that there was a huge lake, I guess Lake Bonneville, and it looks like there were quite a few lakes that we don't have today. Then I want to show you this map, which is a general map of North America. Does it have a date? I'm not sure the date of this map, but it's an old map because you can see Louisiana. It's got the Gulf of Mexico. Down here we've got New Spain. We've got Mexico. And here again is all along the coast of California is New Navarra, which is a Basque Southern French name. And notice above it is Sainte Marie. And this one is more clear. What that we were looking at that word Madela or something. It is Magdalene right there. Magdalene. This is where they landed. People from France, and they named it Magdalene. And Sainte Marie or Mary. And notice that if you go down what today is the Guia River, they called it a coral river at that time. The very end of it is Victory. It marks the spot at the end of the Guia River where I live here as Victory, which is just north of St. Mary, right? So, 1679. Notice right at the northern end of the Gulf of California, it says Septon. And of course, it shows the Great Lakes some kind of weird thing going on there. It says New France, and then New England and Virginia. But over here by California is Septon. Now, N's and M's are a lot of times interchangeable. That's exactly where, right at the top of the Gulf of California, right where the Gia River goes to the right, it goes to a place called Septum, which means seven. And then there's other maps that show exactly what it's talking about. Septum, city of gold. Patria, meaning the inheritance of the fathers, where they buried the treasures of gold. And I'll show you that here in a moment. There's various maps that have that on there. Like it's the whole focal point of the map. The whole map is to tell you how to get there. It's a journey, it's a quest, a campaign. You get victory when you get there, and we'll show you all these words. And always in regard to Mary and Joseph and John and all the rest. And by the way, I noticed this too. The Gulf of California used to be called Marie. On this old map, which is the American Septentrional, which is, I think, the same one we were looking at, but different colors or something. Again, it has the Maria or Marie Ver Mio. But right off this river, it goes up and it goes to Coronado. So that may be one of the places that Coronado came to look for the seven cities of gold, up towards the Apache and the Navajo. In this one, somewhere around 1700, we've got, in the ocean, we've got Marie Dels Ver or something. And of course, this gulf is called Marie. Even the Hudson's got the word Marie, something, but it still has the word Hudson down here in the bottom, but over here it's Marie. And here in this one, again, we've got the word Mer, D, instead of Mary. And down this Gia River, which they call Di Bonguia, which I guess is how we did two L's today. Gila is silent. Gia, it's just, so it was named the Gia, Di Bonda Gia. It goes to the same thing we were looking at, the Apache de Navajo, or the Navajo. And at the end of that Gia River is these mountains again. And on this one, where it goes to the Apache de Navajo on the Gia River, it calls it the River of Good Hope. So when they were going up that river to explore it, they said, this is our hope. We're trying to get somewhere. And it goes to the Zuni. You see, there's the Zuni. So at the end of the Gia River, you come out to Zuni, and that's was their hope to find something. In this one, going up the Gia, it starts off calling it the River of Bonagia, right? So it was Gia, but then it turns into Fort Intendus Urs Liquest. So it was a quest to get to a certain fort where the Zuni Indians were. And then over here you see Taos, New Mexico. But this is all the Apache in those days, they called it. And it was a campaign, or Bonagia. So maybe the word Gia originally had something to do with some campaign or a bona fide whatever. I don't know the language very well, but you look down here at Sonora de Bongia. That's probably where the word Gila came from, the Gila River, the Gia. But it was a quest. Now, this one's interesting because in this area, we have the Colorado, the River Colorado de los Martyrs. The Lost Martyrs on the Colorado up by Yumas. And the Grand River of the Apostles. It's got Philip, Simon, Thedeo, Matthew, or Matthias, and St. Paul is right here. And and Pedro, maybe that's Peter. Peter and Paul and Matthew. But I saw on a different map that the Gia River used to be called the River of St. Paul. And then here it's called the Grand River of the Apostles. So, I don't know, this is all obviously people that were coming here were heavily Christians, looking and talking about Maria and the apostles and going on a quest and a campaign to a place called Victory, which we will find here. Eventually they call it Septim, or the city, 7 cities of gold, where Coronado was on his way. We saw that too. Now, as we get down, these are later maps in 1700s. You see a lot of this Lucy, Carmel, where Elijah was. And again, the river is the Colorado of the Lost Martyrs. And this Gia River is still being called the Grande de los Apostles. Experiencia. And it goes right up to the Zuni area where I'm at. There's a spot along the river called Casa Grande, a big house. And the Sonora is in the New Navarre, so this is New France, and it's still being called New France, all the way up into the area where the Gia River goes. So out here, we've got the same St. Lucia, St. Augustine, there's Mary Magdalene, Guadalupe, St. Thomas, the Three Marys. So Los Angeles, now we know where this term comes from. It came from people, maybe the Knights of St. John or whatever, coming over on their boat looking for a place, the Septimania, 7 cities to bury their gold, the place of victory, on their quest or their campaign down the river of the apostles and the martyrs and the angels. Northern Sonora and New Navarre, or southern France, Languedoc. So I noticed here that, again, this Mary or Myrrh de California. So Mary has something to do with the word California, because they didn't just call it California by itself. And we'll see here in just a second that California most likely means, it's a word that means, I think it's a native word that means the native land, the land of the mountain, or the native people's land. So it's Mary of the native people's land. And there's Magdalene right there. And there's Lucia again. What I think is funny is I've seen this in several of these maps. At the end of the Gia River, there's a circle. And in the circle, it's called New Mexico. New Mexico literally was a state or a area before any of these other states like Idaho or any of these other ones. They had New Mexico right in the Apache Zuni area. But the northern part of New Mexico, it has Taos, surrounded by the Apache and the Zuni. And it says here the Apache peoples. So now here we are in 1730 or something. And we're in New Mexico. It's funny how Florida goes all the way over to New Mexico. There's New Mexico and then there's Florida at this point. California, New Mexico, and then Florida. This is Nova Francia. Pennsylvania is way down here. Philadelphia, Jacobum. Why is it Jacob? Carolinium. And there's Maria, Virginia, Carolina, North Angelia. This is a map of 1720, and the Gia River is back as the Good Hope River. And it goes to the Zuni. And then you go over here to Taos. You see St. Francisco inhabited by the Tiguas. The Tiguas inhabited New Mexico over there by Taos. St. Clara. And there's the river Coborada, or Coronada, probably, as we say it today. Must have went up that river to go up to this Zuni area. And I'm only pointing this one out. I think this is 1725 or something. We've seen all this before, but notice that the Gulf of California goes way up. Where it ends today at the Gia River, here's the Gia River, which is the River of Good Hope that goes over to the Zuni Apache area. And we've been seeing these cities or these dots, and it says Quaquinia, Massaquia, Macoabnabi, Igoapapi, Gualapi. I think those could be the 7 cities of gold that will, I don't know if those are the same names that we'll see on that map where at the end of the Good River of Hope, or sometimes it looks like they call it the Tyson River. But this would be the Gia because it's the same river that goes over to the Apache Nuevi, and then Taos is over further north into New Mexico. Here again, this is 1736. We still got Mary, the California, and we've got the river of the Bona Gia going up to the Apaches, the people of the Apaches. And here is New Mexico, this little circle with Taos at the top. And over to the west, you see the end of the Gia River, which ends in a quest, right? The intention, or a fort, which is their intention as a quest or something. Trying to interpret that the best I can. I don't know what it means. So California, they don't know what it means. I had thought, and people had, a lot of people say, it's something to do with Queen Califia, an island ruled by Queen Califia, some Amazon women. But that's tempting. But then it says here, it's a Native American phrase. Some believe the name comes from the Native American phrase Californo, which means high hill or the native land. So a California pioneer, Joseph Carrillo de Fitch, he believed that California was an indigenous word. So I think that might be it. Maria going to, naming a town Maria on a voyage going to the native land of California, the native people, that was their land. And it wasn't just California that we know today. The whole area was called California, kind of. And then they put places like Marata or Martha or Maria and names in this native land of California. So then there's a lot of these maps that look like this. And we showed this in the other video. And at the end of the Gulf of Mary, of the native land of California, you've got the River Gia going to the right, the Colorado going north, the Totontiac was the Colorado. And this map was in 1597. So this is before some of the maps that we were looking at. This is before 1600 AD. And in this map, the California Gulf doesn't go way up in there, making California an island. So we might maybe assume that if it was an island for a period of time, that would be, it's possible they made a mistake because this one doesn't have it. But what they have here is it's still being called the Maria California, or Maria of the native lands. And as you begin your journey up the river, it starts at a place called Maria Flower. So it's the beautiful flowers of Maria. And that starts the River Gia going east. It's got the Colorado, which they are still calling the Totontiac, which we saw before. As time went on, they call that the River of the Apostles, or the Martyrs. And the Gia, the River of the Apostles, the Lost Apostles, and Los Angeles, and all of these words that we just got through seeing. But the Gia River goes all the way up to a lake, which is then surrounded with the word septum, cititatum, patria. And I'm told that the word patria may mean something like the patriarchal inheritance or something. And septum is 7, and citia is city, and tatum, I'm not quite sure, but something to do with 7 cities or the inheritance. And there you see the 7 cities look like little castles. And like I said, that doesn't name them, but in that other one, there is given names. You see what may be a word that sometimes is spelled Cibola. And there is, again, Granada, which is where they left from in Spain. So it seems like all of these maps are telling us a very clear truth. There were Spanish explorers, there were other, explorers from other regions, French explorers, obviously, from Navarre. And the area around the 7 cities of gold were indeed French. And there's all these connections to French words. And they were very religious people that believed in Marie and the 3 Marys and Martha. But anyway, guys, it's getting late and I'm over an hour by a ways. So I'm going to leave it here and we're going to dig deep and we're going to find all this information out the best we can. And these are not things that have to do with our salvation. I mean, if we didn't know this, we'd still be saved. But this is just interesting. And it's a little speculative, but I believe that we're trying to understand our history and, make sense of it all. Anyway, I want to let you go. I hope you have a wonderful evening, guys. The Lord will bless you. May His grace and peace be with you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.